So the WHO says COVID did not come from a lab in Wuhan. Here's the article. It says, after Wuhan mission on pandemic origins, WHO team dismisses lab leak theory. Taipei, Taiwan says, after a 12-day visit, a World Health Organization mission to Wuhan appeared no closer Tuesday to solving the mystery of the pandemic's origins, reiterating that coronavirus likely spread to humans from an animal and casting doubt on theories it leaked from a lab. So it goes on to say that they investigated and they essentially came back saying, no, there's nothing to see here. It didn't come from a Wuhan lab. Now, that's probably upsetting a lot of people who believe it came from China, that they're the ones who are complicit, that it was their fault. But the reality is that we have enough evidence to show that it didn't come from that lab. We've known this for a long time. The reason we've known this is because we have evidence of the virus actually being around well before December of 2019. We have, let me see if I can find it here. I've got an article to show you that, here it is. This is from Live Science. Okay, this was from November of 2018, November 18th of 2020. It says a new study suggests as early as September of last year, which is how early was the coronavirus really circulating in Italy. A new study suggests as early as September of last year, but some experts are skeptical. So what happened in Italy was there was a group of, I believe, let me see how many people it was. It was like 900 liver cancer patients that they had received. They had received tissue samples from back in they collected these tissue samples in, I believe, October of 2019. And 900 of these samples, they had found that 11% of the samples, when they went back later, so they had these samples stored, they'd collected these samples in October, and fast forward to, we've got the coronavirus outbreak. You go all the way to about a year, almost a year later for these scientists, they went back and looked at those tissue samples to see if they could test for COVID-19. They found 11% of those tissue samples came back with antibodies to COVID-19. This was in October of 2019. Now, remember, the idea is that COVID leaked from a lab in December of 2019 in Wuhan. Well, how is that possible if the Italians, all the way in Italy, have proof of the virus antibodies, which means the person would have had to have had the virus and already recovered. So they're saying if they had antibodies in October, then they would have had to have at least contracted the virus and gotten over it in September at the earliest, right? Maybe even earlier than that if they have antibodies in October. So there's no way it could have come from a lab in Wuhan in December of 2019. Now, that's not to say it didn't come from a lab in Wuhan in October of 2019. August of 2019 or July of 2019, right? That's all possible. But what we know now is it was at least in Italy as far back as September of 2019. We know that now. We have the tissue samples to prove it. They have the science to prove it. They have all of these liver cancer patients who survived it, by the way, something to say, right? So this virus was circulating around, even infecting cancer patients, which is a high-risk group. They clearly survived it. And enough for tissue samples to be taken for some other purpose because they were studying the cancer. And then it turns out that these people had, 11% of them had antibodies already developed to COVID-19. We have more studies of this here in the United States. There was some evidence of the virus circulating at least before December of 2019. Again, blood samples, tissue samples. We have these samples. So the narrative that it came from a lab in Wuhan in December of 2019 is definitely false. The WHO says that. Now, the WHO can't be trusted, right? So that's an organization that runs on the donations of countries and organizations. They can't piss off any of the countries or the organizations that fund them. So you can't really trust them when it comes to what it is they say, because you have to take, what you have to do is always take into consideration what it is they're saying and what their sources of their funding, just like anything, right? You always have to follow the money. So with the WHO, we know that they receive a lot of money from China. We know they receive a lot of money from Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as Gavi, I believe, which is the Global Initiative for Vaccines, something like that. But that's mostly funded by the Bill Gates administration. This is why there's all these discussions about Bill Gates and his push for vaccines. It's because the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation pushes vaccines, but so does other organizations that he heavily funds. So the WHO, you have to consider the source. We don't really know how unbiased they're going to be, considering they run off of these dollars that they need. And so they're coming out and saying, oh, no, it wasn't China. Don't worry about China. It wasn't China. And I agree, it might not have been China. We don't actually know where this came from. If it was in Italy and we can detect it all the way back to at least September of 2019, we honestly have no idea where this came from. But that being said, if it was already circulating that far back and it went unnoticed and no one was freaking out, people were not saying, oh my gosh, look at what's happening. We've got an alarming number of bodies lining up in the streets. We need to dig mass graves. We didn't see that going on back in the fall. What they did say was that the flu season seemed to be a little harder than normal. And that was a narrative all around the world. So we don't know where this came from. We don't know when it came. We don't know when it showed up. I mean, wouldn't it be a scandal if this sucker had been already around for years, a year or two, or even 3, and then it just so happened some scientists figured out that people were getting sick and they decided to test the samples. In the past, they just thought it was the flu. And then now they suddenly test and they say, oh my gosh, we just discovered a new virus. And who knows, right? I mean, that is, this is the thing. We don't really know. But it is interesting. The WHO is saying it didn't come from a Wuhan lab. That is not actually news. If you've been following this channel, I think I told you that news a while ago. This had already been discovered. The tissue samples were there. Antibodies were already developed by October of 2019. We now know it didn't come from the lab in China in December of 2019. Doesn't mean it didn't come from there earlier than that, but it's also probably not likely. Probably came from somewhere else. And the fact is we don't know. And we don't know how long we've had it living amongst us. We don't know what's been going on. And we might have all just freaked out and made things worse.